guys, Geordie Journos, Stamford Bridge, as you can see behind. Where do we start with that one? Not really the night Newcastle United wanted. Now find themselves out of another cup competition within a minute and a half of seeing the game out. Another very costly Kieran Trippier error, and then of course has cost them a win. And then of course the penalty misses from Trippier and Richie, and some excellent penalty taken from Chelsea has seen them go through. I'll quickly start with my emotions after this game before we go into the whats and wherefores and the analysis of how things went and how they didn't. My emotions with that one was I felt quite numb to it actually straight after the game. That's not because I don't care, it was more because I don't really feel like Newcastle deserved anything out of the game. Largely they didn't do anything in an attacking sense, but did defend as a unit reasonably well and kept Chelsea, despite all their possession, at arm's length. But I don't really feel like they did enough to progress. I don't really feel like they did enough to proactively go and win this game. I think they were gifted a goal and did a PSG job and tried to hang on to things beyond that. I think I might have turned to you a couple of times during the game, Dom, and said that it was like PSG mode from about 10 minutes into the game. Even Newcastle United's goal probably felt like it was against the run of play early doors from Callum Wilson. Right, my emotions, like I say, I think it's a tough night, and there's a wider problem here in many ways about the season in general and what's the direction Newcastle United going in. But let's talk about the match first, and then we'll come on to some of the wider themes beyond that. Jordan, thoughts?
Yeah, very, very PSG-like. But what I would say the difference between PSG and Chelsea at night is, okay, Chelsea had a lot of possession and put a lot of pressure on Newcastle's back line, but it actually only resulted in 2 shots at goal until that last minute error by Kieran Trippier. And I think don't want to criticise Kieran Trippier here, because look, I'm the same thinking of the fans online, people reacting to Trippier's error. He has been a fabulous player for his football club and will continue to be a fabulous player for the football club. But ultimately, football is a harsh game. It was his error that cost Newcastle tonight. Because, as I say, Chelsea, they only had 2 shots at goal, 3 including in the goal in the end. They had a lot of pressure. I thought Newcastle's defensive display was actually very, very strong, and they've just unfortunately been let down in the latter stages. I think Kieran Trippier is going for a very, very difficult period in his Newcastle career. It was 5 mistakes, and if you want 5 mistakes leading to goals, and the last 3 out of his 4 games, he's going for a very, very tough period. And yeah, I think you can analyse the game today, but I think they've lost because of that mistake. Could have been better on the shootout. Maybe Matt Ritchie could have been better on the shootout, but again, to cap off Kieran Trippier's disastrous night in many ways, he missed his penalty as well. So I think the exit, okay, probably seems harsh, and I'm trying to get a lot of criticism for this. I think Newcastle's exit is down ultimately to a mistake by Kieran Trippier.
So yeah, I think before obviously I ask you for the same question, your thoughts, Tom, I kind of want to have my say a little bit on Kieran Trippier, if you don't mind. I think for me, football can often be seen through a black and white lens, and I think when you see social media and you see reactions, people, it's either got to be so far this way or so far that way. It's either black or white, and truth is, most of the time, not only in football, you might get a little life lesson off Liam here actually, in life things are quite often, more often than not, they're grey, they're not black or white. And I think when you analyse Kieran Trippier, his short-term form with his long-term form, that's where the grey area comes. Kieran Trippier for me is arguably one of the greatest signings this football club has ever made, for the transformative effect he's had not only on the park but off the field. A lifter of standards, a quality in a new era of expectation. By the same token, he's been dreadful recently. His form, offensively, he's still been the same player, to be honest. Still got forward on the right hand side, offered a real option. Defensively, he's been dreadful. He cost all 3 goals, in my opinion, at Everton, which cost them at least a point. No pushing for a winner, at least a point that day. he was decent against Spurs.
Got done twice off
Spurs,
Son.
he did, yeah. Son had him on toes, didn't he, in that game? And look, it was a tough game for everybody, and it was probably rough to call out Trippier in that game. But you can say at least one of those goals was to blame. And today, he's come on into the game and hasn't really had the calming influence that he usually has. I didn't think his impact at half time. Dan Burn did. I thought Dan Burn was excellent coming on at the break, and you could see a big difference for Burn coming on. Didn't think the same for Trippier. And he's just decision making in certain moments. Do you think we're going to get sprinkled there? Decision making in key moments is really questionable. So that ball, I'd love to see it again, but it looks like it kicks up off the ground, and he doesn't really react. He still tries to produce the same header, which was a cushion back to Martin Dubravka, and doesn't really commit to it properly. That's a player lacking confidence, in my opinion. He's a confident player who is made of tough stuff, who's a leader on the pitch and off the field, a good character by the same token, but he's just lacking a bit of in-game confidence. Kieran Trippier 3 months ago nods that back. He probably decides to leave or flick the ball behind him, knowing that he can't quite get the header that he wants back to the goalkeeper. The in-game Kieran Trippier I see now is making those mistakes, very much like under the slightest bit of pressure from Dwight McNeil, did exactly the same against Everton, and then felt a bit after that. We all know he pulled out of the England squad for personal reasons. We all know that is a fact. It wasn't some clever ploy to allow him to have some rest. It was for a personal reason, and it is fair to also wonder how much of that is having an impact on his mental state at the moment. He's been flogged like every other player, having to play week in, week out. Of course, he had his break, which you'd hope would have been a break not only physically but mentally for him. He's come back and suffered a double blow today, because he had a chance to redeem himself by slotting the penalty away. Then that pressure isn't on Richie, and then you never know how things go on from there. But missing that penalty took the pressure off Chelsea and made it so winnable. I didn't ever feel that Newcastle would win that shootout anyway, simply because the balance of the way the end of the game went and how dominant Chelsea were during the game. You felt that gift of a goal back to them. Callum Wilson's was a gift as well, but the gift of the goal back kind of just switched the total balance towards Chelsea. But Dom, we've gone up for 7 minutes and I haven't said a word yet, so apologies, but coming on your thoughts and some of the wider context of this result.
Yeah, it's just a frustrating one. I think this was a very, very winnable competition for Newcastle, unlike the Champions League, where it was just a case of it would be great to get as far as possible. This one, in the final four, if you went tonight, and Newcastle were 90 seconds away from that, and you just can't legislate for individual errors. It's one of those cruel things in football, and Newcastle, if you're getting the stats out, it's 11 goals conceded in the final 15 minutes of games. They've only conceded 22 all season, so 50% of the goals are conceded are coming as you get.
This is the Geordie Journal's under fire.
So yeah, obviously you can't necessarily say it's physical tiredness, although I did think Newcastle looked tired at times tonight, particularly Anthony Gordon before he took that knock and went off. Miguel Almiron as well, Callum Wilson at times. Newcastle looked tired, and the game seemed to pass someone like Sean Longstaff by a little bit in the midfield. In general, in the first half, Chelsea just ran through them a bit too easily. But yeah, it was just a case of an individual mistake tonight, which cost Newcastle. And looking over the season as a whole, like I say, 11 goals conceded in the final 15 minutes. Away from home in particular, that's an issue. Is it concentration? Is it mental fatigue? I'm not sure. Eddie Howe will certainly be wanting to look at that though. And yeah, I think when the goal goes in 1-1, going to penalties, it's a lottery. But given the way the momentum it didn't really swing in the game. The momentum was all Chelsea's, and Newcastle just happened to score a goal, which again was a mistake, a defensive mistake. And yeah, you just thought Chelsea were probably going to see it out in the shootout, and that's how it transpired. And it just feels frustrating, disappointing from Newcastle's perspective. Could Eddie Howe have done anything different in the second half? I'm not sure. You look at your bench and you've got Lewis Hall, Paul Dummett, or these players who are going to make an impact. I'm not sure, but fresh legs when the squad are really, or the 11 players out on the pitch are really tiring. I think I turned to Liam and Newcastle's plan B a lot of times this season, particularly against the likes of Chelsea, PSG, where they were so unlucky and it was a refereeing error rather than a defensive error. But AC Milan, the plan once they've taken the lead is almost like cross your fingers and hope we can hang on, and it's just a defensive effort from then on. And I thought Newcastle defensively, bar the mistake, were actually really good. I thought Jamal Lascelles and Dan Burn were excellent, but just undone by an individual error. And I think the lack of changes or lack of plan B from Eddie Howe may have played a role, because when the squad are so tired and you're flogging the same players, I don't know how a 19-year-old Lewis Hall coming on for the final 10 minutes just running up and down the wing is any worse an option than Miguel Almiron, who was literally dead on his feet, wasn't he?
So this is it, man. You're right. This is it. Like, I don't want to get too critical of Sir Edward of Howe, as
it's the same with Kieran Trippier, isn't it?
Anointed by Dom. Yeah,
transformative characters at the club, and they're almost like, a lot of people feel like they're immune to criticism, but let's be honest, they're not.
No, I think you mentioned it. I think with one of you two guys when we were sitting talking, is does he trust the people he's got on the bench? And if he doesn't trust them, then they've made some big mistakes. Why'd you go into a squad? Why'd you go into a season with players on the bench who you don't trust to play? You've made a big mistake if you're in situations where you're going to go through to a semi-final. This club doesn't make many semi-finals, certainly hasn't done in its recent history. You're on the verge of it and you can't make a change. How does... Look, I get why Lewis Hall isn't playing. I get why he isn't playing. I get why he isn't playing left back. It's been pretty obvious why he isn't playing left back. Defensively, he hasn't at this stage in his career looked up to playing Premier League level as a defender in a back four. He hasn't looked up to it. And I think Eddie Howe's seen that, and he hinted at that in his recent press conferences. But as you mentioned, and we were almost pulling my hair out, I don't need to lose any more, but we were pulling my hair out here in the press box. And it was, can Lewis Hall not be chucked on to say, right son, you're 19-year-old, go and run your socks off for 5 minutes, go and run your socks off for 10 minutes, chase every ball, get back in position as fast as you can, give us a 70-minute performance energy-wise in 10 minutes, go and run your socks off. Why? That frustrates the life out of me today. It really did. It really upset us how he didn't do that. It upset us why he couldn't say, come on then, go 5 at the back. It was all Chelsea. Let them have the ball. Let them have the ball. They've got it anyway. Put an extra defender in. They started throwing forwards in left, right and centre. Stock the lines up. Make it harder and harder for them to break through. None of that happened. It was just keep Wilson and Almiron on, who were running around or jogging around aimlessly, trying their best, but were absolutely knackered. The same for Matt Ritchie. Matt Ritchie is well below the levels required. Why is he still in the squad? You can't have cheerleaders in a squad. I think that's probably got to be one of the major lessons learned by Eddie Howe in this period for me. Has got to be that a squad to play at the levels that Newcastle United are at now, and we've got to judge them by the levels that they're playing at. You can't judge them by levels of the past. No good looking back and saying, yeah, but you were fighting relegation 2 years ago. But they're not now, and they haven't been for 2 years. They're fighting on all fronts at the very top end of the division. They're fighting in a Champions League, which they're going to have a struggle to get back into, and they're in a quarter-final of a competition. They're going to have an FA Cup, which they should go on a good run in. They're one of the best teams in the country. They should go on a good run in that. You can't have a squad where you can only rely on 17 of those 25. What's the rest of them? Is Matt Rich? Do you trust Paul Dummett to play games? Why? If not, why not? Do you trust Lewis Hall to come into the team? If not, why not? Is Matt Ritchie good enough to be playing at this level? If not, why is he in the squad? There's numerous questions to be answered in that regard, and it's no good. The squad can't carry 4 goalkeepers. The squad can't carry passengers if you want to fight on all fronts. And I hope for me, and again, I love Eddie Howe. Eddie Howe has been amazing. But that is my criticism. I don't think the plan B, as you mentioned, was there. I don't think it existed today. And I think he could have made changes where he didn't. And I think that could have proved costly, because yes, the individual error happened, but that ball might not go in the box if there's an extra man in midfield who runs another yard to close down a cross, or there's another defender in there inside Kieran Trippier who actually heads the ball away instead. There's little things. You don't know how a game plays out when the chess pieces are moved around. And the other criticism for me was, if the squad isn't good enough, they had a chance to change it in the summer, and they didn't change it in a direction that was beneficial enough to be able to fight on 4 fronts. It's actually proven it's probably only been good enough to fight on 2 fronts at any one moment because of the amount of injuries. And yes, we all know injuries are a big thing. But one thing I would say about this is, in years to come, the history books will read that Newcastle United went out in the last 16 of the Champions League, and they'll read group stage didn't make the last 16, and they'll also read that Newcastle United went out in the last 8 of the Carabao Cup. It will not have an asterisk next to it saying this was because of 13 injuries at any one time. I'm sorry, the history books will read the facts are Newcastle United went out at these stages, whatever the reasons. And it's sad because it feels like this season was a real opportunity, and it has got a real risk for me of fizzling out into something quite unimpressive when it was set up to be something remarkably impressive coming into December. Jordan, any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, it all.
I've went on one a little bit, but I'm trying not to be too critical of Howe in many ways. But I do also think it's fair. I mean, he had that little snipe saying there's too many tacticians out there in the press box even, but anyone can have a say. We're all entitled to a say. And I think we're all fair and honest in what I say here on Geordie Journals.
I think it does all go back to injuries, and if Eddie Howe has a fully fit squad, the likes of Paul Dummett and Matt Ritchie don't get in the squad. And look, I know we look at the transfer windows. How many transfer windows had under new ownership? 4.
Was it not? Is this not coming up to Eddie Howe's 5th?
Is it?
Yeah.
But is that enough windows under FFP to have a squad overhaul and have 25 quality players? I still think in many ways that they're probably paying the price for years and years of under funding from Mike Ashley, and they're having to build a squad, and they can't. Look, they would love to, I'm sure, but they can't go out and spend 500 million on a new squad. So they've gradually got to build it, and I think they're getting there. And I think this summer will be the time where, you put it so bluntly there, Liam, cheerleaders, where some of them end up leaving this club and they bring in better players. I think to have a 25-man strong squad takes time. They have had opportunities. I think we've reflected on the summer transfer business. Could they have done more in that window? Yes, it's been sort of unprecedented times, like Sandro Tonali's, Harvey Barnes. But then you put some of your budget towards signing Lewis Hall, who can't get off the bench. So I see it from both sides. But to try and add a different side to your argument, even defend Eddie Howe in some kind of way, building a 25-man squad takes time.
Yeah, it's a long way off though, and we're seeing this because they're not able to get a team out. They're not able to play with a team in a midweek and a weekend. They're not able to do it. They're having to put the same players out there consistently. It's a squad with 4 goalkeepers. It's a squad with only 2 strikers, which was a massive oversight in my opinion in the summer. I've said it on here before, and it might be ridiculed in some respects, but Chris Wood's squad position when they lost him last January hasn't been replaced. He was the 3rd striker who would relieve both of them if somebody needed to come in, if one of them picked up a knock, or if they needed a rest, or he'd play in the League Cup. None of that has happened. They haven't given anybody an opportunity to come and be that 3rd striker. They've obviously looked at thinking, can we get other players and strengthen other areas? They've signed a left back to play left back who is not trusted to play left back. That, at this stage in the season, going at the January window, and we're halfway through the season now, and we're out of 2 of the 4 competitions that we're fighting on, that has been a mistake. They've made an error in signing Lewis Hall at this stage. It's not to say Lewis Hall won't be a good player. Sandro Tonali's been an error. You couldn't have necessarily foreseen what was going to happen. You can talk about due diligence all you want, but without looking at the guy's ultra personal details in it with a fine tooth comb, you probably wouldn't find the problems that were lying there. But if you look at it in a black and white world, as I mentioned before, and of course this is a grey area, but if you look in a black and white world, you would say those 2 signings have been a failure on this season. That doesn't mean in general, it doesn't mean in the long term they won't be good signings, but in the short term they haven't provided the cover and the options that everyone expected them to. Bearing in mind that was an outlay of, that's 50% of the players brought in to strengthen a team who finished in the Champions League have had 0 impact. Harvey Barnes, 0 impact due to injury. The only one who's had an impact has been Tino Livramento, who's been an absolute sensation, who has in many ways redeemed the whole transfer window of the summer by his incredible performances. But again, he looks like he was out on his feet again tonight, and there's only so much you can keep doing. But I'm quite tired of talking of the injuries. That it's obvious that they're having an impact. but I think it's also quite naive to suggest Newcastle United are the only team that has injuries in the Premier League. Look at Manchester United, they've never been able to pick the same two centre-halves for 2 games in a row. They've literally had as many at times in number injuries that Newcastle United have had in their squad. Of course, a team constructed of a lot more internationals, a lot more quality, a lot more money spent on it over time. But it's a falsity to suggest that Newcastle United are the only team that suffered from injuries. Are they dealing with managing the squad that they have, which is small, correctly at the moment? Only Eddie Howe will be able to know that, because we don't know the ins and outs. I just looked at it today and thought it was crying out just to try and adjust something to arrest that decline, which Newcastle United were. They were hanging on, but I've got to say it felt like a Chelsea equaliser was coming at some point. Probably when it came was one of the points where it felt like it was coming least. I think you felt as the time ticked over into the 90th minute and onwards, it felt like they'd hang on. It didn't feel like Chelsea were going to score, and it was a gift that obviously cost them. I don't feel like I've been too harsh. I think I've gone a bit harsh on some of that.
Yeah, I think some people might think so. Yeah, I think
it's a game of opinions.
Yeah,
it's a game of opinions.
It's ultimately Newcastle were 90 seconds away from another cup final, so people will look at it like semi-final. I correct you correct me.
We'll keep each other real.
So yeah, and they've done it with such a depleted squad. So yeah, I think the positive people out there will take that, look at that and go, yeah, can we be too critical? But I think Newcastle are just ultimately this season as a whole probably paying the price for overachieving last season, if you like, where they had a relegation battle squad Eddie Howe inherited with the bells and whistles of world-class players like Kieran Trippier, like Bruno, and they added to that with Alexander Isak, who then got injured, and they managed to achieve a 4th place finish. And then ultimately, if you're looking at the team, through no real fault of their own, they haven't strengthened in the summer, which we've touched on. They've spent a lot of money, but the starting 11 has not got stronger, because you can't play Sandro Tonali. Lewis Hall isn't in the starting 11. Tino Livramento is possibly the only player. Harvey Barnes is out injured. So now they've got the same team, which is built on the foundations of a Mike Ashley squad, era squad, Steve Bruce squad. And that starting 11, as good as it is, once you get those injuries, you turn into your Matt Ritchies, your Paul Dummets. And it's no slight on them as such, because they've been great servants to the club. But ultimately, when you look at Newcastle as a Champions League team, or a team wanting to be consistently in the Champions League, those players should be nowhere near the squad. But the reality of the situation is Newcastle have progressed so much in such a short period that those players, they almost haven't had the chance to let them go, if you like, because they've had roles to play in Eddie Howe's squad, I guess.
I just think to add to that, I think as a football club, many ways probably learn on the job. When was the last time Newcastle United won Europe? When was the last time they competed on 4 fronts?
Eddie Howe's learning as well. It's new to him.
Yeah, it's gone from 4 to 2 in a week.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
so I hope they have done some learning, because the season has largely unravelled in the space of a week. It's facts. I'm really sad saying that. I don't like saying that, but we're looking at facts here, and you've got to say the season has gone from being half an hour away from almost a real triumph in getting through to the last 16, and today here against Chelsea, who've pulled up no trees and will continue to pull up no trees for the rest of the season. That was of the 3 games I think that they've had in this competition, probably the easiest, the most winnable.
No, I'd agree. And yeah, Newcastle have done a lot of teams a lot of favours by knocking out Manchester United and Man City, and now you look at that final 4 and how winnable it could potentially be. Obviously Liverpool, West Ham play tomorrow night, but yeah, it's, I think, a missed opportunity for Newcastle.
Second half of the season's massive for this club now,
and they're still 6th in the Premier League. Like,
yes.
let's take a step back and look. They've been fighting on all these fronts and come so close to progressing to the final 4, to progressing to the last 16 of the Champions League, while also, other than the recent 2 away games, have been really quite good in the Premier League and have been up and in around the European places, bar the first month, pretty much since then. So you have to look at it, league form, generally has been very good. I just think the late goals conceded, the injuries, and being out the cup competitions, it just feels a bit of a downer in recent weeks, doesn't it? Other than that Fulham win.
I say it puts a lot of pressure on that Sunderland game, by the way, because if Newcastle are to go out of another competition in the space of 3 weeks, and you've only got the Premier League to focus on, okay, it might benefit them, they might be able to mount a top 4 challenge, but that Sunderland game, there's a lot of pressure on it because of obviously the rivalry behind it. But if they lose that, I think there possibly might be pressure on Eddie Howe, to be honest, because losing against Sunderland, for many Newcastle managers, as they've found down the years, is a no-no, and there's a lot of pressure on that game now because they can't be out of 3 competitions come the new year. It just wouldn't be good in the slightest, to put it.
It wouldn't be. I don't think. I'll have to disagree. I don't think the pressure comes on Eddie Howe if they do go out. And I think it's all hypothetical. But I think
I'm just trying to say there's big pressure on that Sunderland game.
I think certain sections of the Newcastle fan base will raise questions if Eddie Howe and Newcastle were to lose to Sunderland. But at the moment, I think there's such a big caveat with the injuries where you can almost forgive Eddie Howe. And then we spoke about the squad and does he trust certain members of the squad to play?
That's the biggest problem for me, isn't the injuries. It's the fact you have a 25-man squad that you name, and going into the season, he must know in the back of his mind that he has, unless it's absolutely desperation times, he will not play Paul Dummett, he will not play Matt Ritchie, he will not, if fit, play Javier Manquillo, he'll not play Emil Kraft. He'll not play Mark Gillespie. We're already talking 5 into a 25-man squad. That's a considerable chunk that is going to have to be addressed sooner rather than later. If this club is to make the progress, which it's made incredible progress in the last couple of years, but if they're not to stagnate, and I think Eddie Howe has learned on the job. I think that's a really important thing to stress, but they have to learn lessons from this. The lessons have to be that if you play at such a high intensity level, that you can't always rely on the same players to have to play week in, week out. And it's okay looking at injuries and saying we're so unfortunate X, Y and Z and this is the reason why, but if you have enough players in your squad of a certain level, then the injuries that they've got wouldn't even make as much of a difference as what they have. It's now got to the point where he's got players in his squad who are largely useless. What is the point in having a player in your squad if you're not going to use them? There is no point in having them in your squad. Sorry, Dom, that wasn't a reflection on saying the players themselves are useless. They're football players, and they're in a squad, but the manager is refusing to use them, which deems them useless. It's a strange situation, and it's one that I thought he could have maybe taken a little bit of heat off those on the pitch today by throwing a couple on and just transforming things slightly. But it comes down to the plan B thing, and look, we're probably going around in circles now, but it's probably a time to...
It feels like a very...
Negative.
It's very negative.
It is, Dom. It is, Dom. We're out the cup.
Yeah.
You don't want to be out the cup.
Disappointed at the way Newcastle have exited the cup competition, where, yeah, they were close, but ultimately it's just another late mistake, isn't it? So
there we go. Right.
God.
We're passionate.
We need to find
the Geordie journals.
It was a week of fine margins. It was a week of fine margins, something what it was. But you look at the wider situation, and to talk about injuries, lack of trust in the squad, I think is a valid. I think it's valid. A valid point. Valid points, shall I say?
Right. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Go on.
I was just like, still 6th in the Premier League. Hopefully, bounce back at Luton. They need to address that away form, and that's something Eddie Howe will be looking to do this weekend. And we'll give you half an hour worth of negativity. I don't think we've ever been so negative on the Geordie.
No, I don't think it's not necessary. I don't always say it. You can't always see it through that lens. It's not negativity. I think there's a lot of fair questions and a fair point. I think we'll only be raising the type of issues that a lot of people watching this video will be feeling exactly the same.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to call. I think a lot of people tonight will be as frustrated as what maybe I was about changes that were made. Doesn't mean I'm right. Doesn't mean I'm wrong either. A lot of people will be frustrated by the transfer business. A lot of people will look and say they didn't strengthen their squad. They took the same squad in and they've probably been served what they deserve in many ways, that they've struggled to compete on all fronts because they didn't strengthen. Yep. A lot of people will look and say the other way around, like you are, and say, do you know what? it's not the end of the world. We're 6th, we can still fight, and Luton comes along and then you beat Forest, and it's a totally different outlook going into that as you mentioned, Jordan, a tough FA Cup game. I don't believe Eddie Howe is under any pressure. He's got enough cash in the bank and what he's achieved in such a short space of time that there isn't any pressure there. Fans, if they start getting on his back, which they won't, I don't think they will.
But I'd say fans defend Eddie Howe to the hill, and rightly so. But I think if they are to lose that game and they've exited 3 competitions in the space of 3 weeks, I think that barrier in terms of fans defending becomes a little bit weaker. That's my personal opinion.
No, I think that's fair. I do think it's. I'm not all for this be all and end all stuff with the Sunderland game. I'm really not.
It's huge.
Yeah, I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just not for the be all and end all thing. I think tonight was a bigger game than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and they're out. So
and they're out.
You can't lose the next one.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Right, have we got anything to add? It's not negative. It's constructive. Constructive, Dom.
Yeah.
You don't believe us.
No, I think I might have started the whole negative thing by saying Eddie Howe doesn't...
It was me. I said Kieran Trippier cost Newcastle United this game. So
well, he did, yeah.
That was my fault.
Facts is facts. He did. It was his error that allowed Chelsea back in when they didn't look like they were going to get back in. At that moment in the game in particular, we've given justifications as to why. Right. Like, comment, share, subscribe for 3 Mr. Negatives here ahead of Christmas. If you like the content that we do get involved in the conversation. We love doing this kind of thing, even though we are a bit negative on an evening like tonight, having been dumped out in the Carabao Cup on penalties. But yeah, we love it. Click the bell for all your Geordie Journos content. Like, comment, share, subscribe.